everybody. I hope we're going to keep ourselves all warm in this tent as the sort of mist comes around us, and welcome to this session, Becoming Human. Now, I have the opportunity here to be in conversation with Bracha Ettinger, who is a painter. And this is the first thing I would like you to grasp. We're in the realm of art. We have lots of books to show you. She had a big retrospective in 1990 or 2000 already. She's been exhibited widely at the Whitechapel, at the Pompidou, at the Drawing Centre in New York, various European centres, Brussels, as well as a solo exhibition in Israel. She was in the Air La Pompidou, the grand review of 20th century art since 1980, all represented by women's intelligence and genius. So we are really going to talk about this question of how art helps us to think about becoming human. She's also an abstract painter, which is something a little bit, as one said, unfashionable at the moment, since we've all kind of lost sight of the greatness of painting, its questions. But you have an opportunity to see her work. There are 4 paintings in the little exhibition space of the Vegas Gallery upstairs in the hall. If you go in there and look upstairs. And you have an opportunity, therefore, to actually encounter the specificity, the materiality of her painting. Now, in her painting, a certain figurality emerges. Sometimes even faces come through, etc. But we have to start with the question of someone still working in the great tradition of the unharvested richness of this extraordinary activity of painting, which is about time, which is about contemplation, about meditation, about an openness to the world where something happens, not that the paintings are of things, but something happens in the paintings, which of course may then happen for us when we ourselves come to meet this strange other world, this other experience that's happening. Now, her work also belongs in the world of, like many artists, of serious engagements with history. So it's not just a personal contemplation, it's a contemplation of something to do with the legacies of history. But as we know, the legacies of the 20th century are the legacies of trauma. Increasingly, we realize that the 20th century wasn't this great century of enlightenment and delight and progress, but was marked by some of the most egregious catastrophes on the scale of war and human destruction, like Hiroshima, on the scale of interhuman destruction, like genocides, first the Holocaust, Rwanda, Cambodia, Indonesia, you name it, let alone the vast quantity of apparent natural catastrophes, which of course always impact in specifically human social ways. It's always the poor who suffer when there's a landslide or an earthquake. So these are still human catastrophes. So her work is to catch up traces of this legacies of trauma as she's lived them through her own life, and as she is, in a sense, a kind of receiver and transmitter of histories both before her own time and during her own time. Now, this leads us to think about, what can art do in relation to the sense that we come after a century in which not just ordinary beastliness between humans, but most philosophers recognize that the legacies of the 20th century have left humanity itself wounded in ways it can't digest, and that's what trauma means. It means something, an extremity that has occurred for which we have no means individually to metabolize it. We are left with a kind of hauntingness that something dreadful has happened, but we don't know what it is. And the same can be said of cultures. We have no means fully to grasp what it was that happened. And philosophers and theologians and others have been trying to say, what was it that happened when the solidarity of all that bears a human face was fundamentally breached as it was in the 20th century. And we live in an age of a new kind of horrorism, where it's not we think, oh, there's a war, but we might walk out here and be blown up. We live, the ordinary people bear the risk of terrible violence nowadays. So can art do something? Now, in her practice as a painter, Bracha also produces notebooks. So I'm just going to show you a little bit, just to get us into this world, just to see, because I think it's one of the most extraordinary things from my experience and why I'm so happy to be here, is to understand how could art give rise in the same level, but in its own way, as philosophy or theology or historiography, to an understanding of the situation we now face, where humanity was almost catastrophically wounded as it was by the 20th century, but we are thinking how we might go forward. And this places a new, or gives a new space to art, to be the seedbed from which could generate ways of thinking about subjectivity, what it is to be a human being, but mostly and most importantly, what it is to be a co-human being, a human being who is always with other human beings. Most philosophy now is about self and other, as if, how should we deal with the gendered other, the raced other, the animal other. But what is if we listen to what Bracha is teaching us about the notion not of intersubjectivity, but co-subjectivity, trans-subjectivity. So there's a new vocabulary she's generating for us. And this comes out of her very beautiful notebooks. She keeps notebooks, and I learnt much about her work from the first edition in the 1990s, when the kinds of reflections she made daily on her paintings, as she went through the process, began to generate a language, insights, which she then translated into, as she says, the only other language she had to speak that in, which was psychoanalysis. So Bracha's presented to you in the catalogue as a psychologist. She's an artist, but an interdisciplinary artist, as all great artists are, who live with literature, philosophy, history, thought, and can therefore, as it were, express their artistic or activate their artistic process in conversations, in performances, in installations, even in a form of teaching. So she's also a professor of visual arts and aesthetics at the European Graduate School. Now, this proposition I want to put to you just as to frame things, and we'll come in just a few more minutes introduction, where she makes a statement about the nature of art, that contemporary aesthetics is moving from what she calls the phallic structure, me versus the other, to what she is offering us to think about, what she calls the matrixal sphere. And as you can see, she writes, we're carrying into the 21st century enormous traumatic weight, and aesthetic witnessing, this is a concept, aesthetic witnessing, note what she's done to the word and she'll explain it, brings its awareness to culture's surface. So that the artist is making something come to the surface of culture where we have to encounter it and think about it. They bring to light new alliances confronting the limits of shareability in the trauma and the jouissance of the other, and the beautiful accessed by artworks in our era. And she stresses we're living through the massive effects of a trauma that spreads from individuals, goes to all of it, that moves between generations and cultures, carries new possibilities for the effective apprehending and produces new artistic effects. And this is the crucial line where aesthetics, something absolutely specifically artistic, approaches ethics. How do we relate to others than us, beyond the artist's conscious control? So it's not an intent to say, I'm going to be an ethical artist. It's allowing a whole new way of thinking to emerge through artistic practice. We're going to come back to that quotation in a minute. But when you look at her work, and I just want to give you just a few clues into this, which is the process that she started from as a painter, was then to move away from painting. And she is the first artist to use the photocopier as a means of taking some of the traces of history which are in photographic or documentary image or documents which already bear the traces of history. Who were they made by? Perpetrator photographs, documents of a time before the Holocaust, German aerial explorations during the First World War of the land then called Palestine. Okay. But passing it through the photocopier is blind. It's not an eye. It just translates something into light, which is then translated into grains, which are then electrically charged to form patterns. And she interrupts it, so you have a trace of a trace that is fading and emerging, which becomes a surface for a meeting. She then meets it with her hand, her gestures, some more automatic than others, and there are layerings. Many different moments intersect, but become the baseline, the sort of support for a series of works which were first made as composites of these papers and increasingly became the site of a return to, a rediscovery of painting as touching, as color, as affectivity. And you can see there's a certain fidelity to certain images that are very much the border space with terrible, terrible suffering, with indeed terrible and horrific death, which are clothed and veiled in the colors of grief and compassion, giving a completely different affect. And you'll see as I go through this, the increasing density, that those trace images have disappeared and paintings are now not, as it were, where paint meets a trace of the past, but themselves, as you'll see when you see the most latest work, where actually something is emerging out from within. Now,
this one is exposed.
yeah, this one is literally, you can see it, and you can experience what happens when you look at it. And there's a different way of looking here, which we won't go into fully. She calls it the matrixial gaze. But you can see how something literally is coming from within. Light is emerging. And this is not a painting like Richter's, which is about the power of the legacy of the past as one that is like an entombing, deadly surface. It's one which is full of life and possibility and invites you to a different kind of contemplation. So I'm going to go back to this quotation. So I wanted to put this in place, and it's very difficult to talk about an artist as she sits beside you in the third person. But Bracha and I have known each other for years and years and years and worked together in many ways, because I have been studying this work, because it does take 20, 25 years to understand what an artist might be doing, let alone to keep up with the space and rate of the change. But in every time that she makes her work, insights emerge. And so I'm going to ask Bracha to talk a bit, first of all, around her sense of what it is that art can do for us. In a sense, what is this question of why painting can find its place, why beauty can find its place in relation to this situation that we find ourselves, of how to almost re-become a new kind of human being after the catastrophic potential death of humanity in what happened in the century of modernity. Ooh. Small question.
I warned Griselda that to begin with I will read a little. And when I read, I feel inside my universe somehow, and then we can converse. So I'm going to read to you from something which it's a bit typical, because each time I write something, then I look at it a few months later and I say, but this was not precise and this is not exact and you have to take it over again and so on. So this is a kind of a version of what I wrote somewhere else, but which was written for this year. Something about what is painting for me. Painting is a transmission, intersection, and a web of resonating strings. If you will see that the real images, you will realize that at even though it's not a film and it's not a video, you can take it from different sides and you will see different things happen. It has to do with a certain relating to the materiality and finally to color. That there is a possibility to contact colors so that it is working through light and not through color. And I think that some artists discovered it through different centuries, and it's still not really, all the possibility of that are not still clear. So when that happens, you can contact with different traits of what I put there, of what I'm thinking, and you can connect to it from different angles. This is what Griselda will probably call the abstract side of the work, even when figuralities are related to, because I'm always working with certain traces of images that still haunt me. So we're talking about something that takes time and is slow. Slowly things can form themselves. And painting is a kind of a wandering dwelling in that sense. It's a kind of a pregnant place that is, in a duration of time, it offers again and again a possibility both for the artist and for the viewer, I hope, of co-emerging, to emerge together with, and co-fading, to get out of it, but not completely, never totally get out of it, in what I call border linking and border spacing with enigmatic traces of different periods and materials, traces of the world from different times and sites, past, but also virtual and also future. I hope we will have time to explain why I said that. So trauma is not about dealing with the past and just transforming it, but it is also about all these places which are so enigmatic and work in a different way on us that you could also attract strings from different periods and not only what you are dealing with or your own past. You start to see that which is not you and which does not even reflect you. That's where the concept of fascinance enters. And the same dwelling place, the painting, can be stretched between different unconscious public and internal times, and the same time duration connects different public and psychic places. Such a space-time body, often counter-event in artworking, I associate with the word Mishkan in Hebrew. And counter-event, the meaning of that is not just an event happened, another event, another event, another event, or an encounter happened and then we move. And counter-event for me is a process in time. So with the painting, with the making of it, but also with the looking at it, if you don't take your time to enter, there will not be an encounter event. Works of art are only occasions. They are occasion for some affects to arise and some knowledge to be received. But you might not take that occasion, and that's also perfectly all right. But so there is the question of duration. Brian Masumi wrote on the painting that called it painting still. Still. It's yet a painting yet, but it is also the stillness that this kind of work allows. So we are not moving in the rhythm that the filmmaker decided for us, for example, taking in what we can, but we can also choose and walk around. The word Mishkan in Hebrew, which evokes the idea of the spirit as a Shechina. Mishkan and Shechina, these are two Hebrew words, that enters me and stretches me, or you, beyond myself or yourself. The first meaning of Mishkan is a place and a site for the work of the holy. Let's take the holy now not necessarily as God, but as that which escapes our consciousness, and we are still aware that our poor few senses cannot catch everything from the world or the cosmos. We are very limited. So the site of the work of the holy, which was not associated with a place, but was wandering. In general, the idea of the Mishkan was a place of dwelling that can move. One moment here, one moment there, one moment there. So the holy is not, iconic in that sense. But the Hebrew sent us also to another signifier, that of shchenut, neighborhood. Thus, not only evoking relations of inside and outside for a dwelling place, which doesn't have to be constant, and which have a resonance. It has a resonance and the idea of besidedness. We are always neighboring, and we are always resonating in this one with this besidedness, side-by-sideness, that for me, on the human level, if we move now to that, evokes the idea of witnessing, to be with and to witness, that we cannot witness in art an event without being somehow with it, entering it, going out of it, and so on. But you are with it, and you are from that kind of witnessing that art can supply, which is on the aesthetic level, right? We can realize the possibility, and we can even choose it, that we can move from that into a kind of a witnessing of who is the I and who is the other. Now, art, I think, can do this kind of encounter eventing with materials that are alive or not alive, in a sense, so that this kind of capacity for witnessing is also for events that you did not live through, but somebody else was living through. So there is this kind of demanding connection with events in which you are invested, that they become, that you become, I call it, if it is human, other human or living being, I talk about the trans-subjective strings and capacities and traces that remain from these encounters. And when it is about subject and object, subject and world, I talk about transjectivity. To think about a work of art not as an object, that even though it is also an object that you can sell or you can buy or you can destroy, but the importance of it is not in its being an object, but it's in being a transject, that it has the capacity, if you enter it in your own way, it has the capacity to make your own resonance tremble with it. So you come out of looking or listening or viewing somehow transformed. Yesterday we were talking a little, the beginning of saying that for me, one of the capacity that evolves through art and with art and can then move into the human and the ethical space is that we don't simply look with the eyes or listen with the ears, but if we really want to transconnect to whoever or whatever, then we need some kind of affective capacities that do not make the immediate move of rejection and of objection, which is so much a la mode. We object, we reject, me, the other, and so on. The definition of me, myself, in Western culture is, starting from Freud, is that the other is whatever I rejected from me. This is the formatting of I, me, I, and non-I is a format of rejection or objection. But I think the human being cannot and will not survive if we recognize only these mechanisms for connecting with the other. So one of the mechanisms which is aesthetical and which is proto-ethical at the same time is the mechanism of compassion. That is this opening of myself. What is compassion? I open myself to whatever it is with a certain decision to fragilize myself, not to worry about me, to open to the other or to an other subject in compassion. It means we are accessing something which is not us and allowing it still to be itself. In the same way, the O is a mechanism, affective mechanism, where we say something is beyond me, is wonderful, or like in nature, but it's not going to burn me. I'm not going to run away and hide. I'm going to stay there and absorb and share and be transformed with. And I think that works of art has the possibility to give us something and transform us if we enter them with this kind of openness, and which demands a kind of innocence after innocence, innocence without innocence, that we can still do that without any paranoid mechanism, not to be defended all the time. So the witnessing that the art allows evokes a possibility of a passage to an ethical witnessing, a passage from art to ethics. And one of the subjects of yesterday was whether, what we do with all these politicals. And I say from art to ethics and from ethics to the political, not from the political to the political, which is an endless war. Art then, as a time, place, duration body, where you dwell beside others and the cosmos, and they dwell inside outside you, where you are neighboring strange things, and the stranger affectively known but enigmatic, and allow the archaic mode of fascinance to take its course and work on the one hand, while hinting at the possibility of witnessing on the other end, even to whatever you did not cause. Here again we have the question of becoming a human, that we now have to deal with traces of trauma and wars here and there. Even we have to deal and take a responsibility somehow to events we did not cause, and we were not the source of them. It is still because the transmissivity between people and in the world is so high, and we are elaborating traces of joy and of trauma of so many different others, so that it is only if we realize our responsiveness to that we can introduce some kind of a change. And I think that this is artworking is doing precisely that. It allows the opening up of a spiral evolvement, goes like this, that engage border timing and border spacing that are involved in what I call transjective metamorphosis. Oh, we have music. Now we can either reject it or just do with it. Let's do with it. In art, transsubjective and transjective encounter events take place by way of an experience that adds to your own process of becoming a subject. Even when you contact only an object or you process something, you participate in a process, in the other, in the self, in the cosmos. I could say only briefly, but I suggest you could read on that if this interests you, that the accessing whatever we access with the affective approach of compassion is a precursor for feeling beauty. And by beauty, I don't mean that the car is beautiful and the tree is beautiful. I mean beauty in the sense that Socrates and Plato were talking about, and then Kant tried, and Hegel, and the traditional, a beauty that does not allow us to say, okay, this was beautiful, now I want to wear it, But a beauty that keeps you coming and going and allow you to realize that your opening itself, the human opening to whatever it is there, plays a part in what is beauty. So then if you realize that, then you don't want to be manipulated by all kind of advertisement, beautiful, look like this, look like that, and all this flooding, flow and stream endless images that try to seduce us all the time. And the sublime, of course, we can, if we take the idea of nature and we see something enormous and we say this is sublime, there is the material, the vibrant material, the atoms, whatever happens there would happen with us or without us. There would be this kind of sublimity. But the sublime is human, and it is for the human being. and you can reach whatever it is with the sense of the sublime and interfere in the sense of the sublime when you enter or when you contact it through the access of your own owing, giving something the place through O. Now, what is O is very interesting. There are concepts that we gave up because we gave up God or we gave up the holy and so on. But I think that we can leave aside the question and keep the human accesses still open. Because what is O? It's fear is something threatens me, I'm going to run away. But O is something threatens me, but I still feel there is something there for me which is bigger than me and different than me. And I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay, but I'm not going to conquer it or appropriate it. So this feeling of O leaves the relations of inside and outside still there. There is a difference. We are differentiating, negotiating, and still I do not take every outside to be myself. So through this kind of O, the sublime as human enters the picture. And we could talk about this long time. But what I say is working in the domain of what we officially call art doesn't promise beauty or the sublime. There's not a promise there. The viewer have also a decision to make how you enter it or you don't enter it. There is the musicality of things needs your time. We see this very clearly with music. We don't see this very clearly with images, but still it is the same. So the move itself, and I talk about the viewer just as I talk about the artist, for me, the move itself is to allow yourself to be more fragile, not more strong, less clever, not more clever. Levinas talks about the human. He says that how can we talk about humanity? He says this following Blanchot. How can we talk about humanity when we saw that everything that this represents, what human beings are able to do to one another and to the cosmos and to the environment, and how can still we need to, but we have to rework it all the time. What is human and what is humanity? So Levinas says that there is a state which he calls a state of youth or innocence, eternal passivity, that he associates with the ethical positioning in the world, but he associates it with the total past. So this innocence is always in the past, and we cannot reach it in the now. And when it is reached in the now, the subject is sacrificed, in a way eliminated. This is true for Lacan, for Levinas, for many. But in my way, and through this outworking and through this encounter eventing negotiation, what I say, that there is a possibility. It passed through the feminine in the human, but it belongs to men and women alike. There is a possibility that this kind of a passivity and fragilization and self-fragilization and not keeping to the identity of the I is a kind of an eros. Levinas says there is no eros of passivity, right? So yes, there is an eros, an active passivity that works in the world. So when you enter in contact with any material with more passivity and fragilization, you start to allow that material show you its components without us interfering too much. And I hope that even science can use this idea that we will have a smaller dose from our own machines so that more of the vibrant materiality will come. Because we share many strings and links with one another and with the world, and which our culture suppress. I stop now, so you will.
Okay, so one of the things I could see from the audience is, you know, you're being taken on a journey into a very elaborate and complicated but incredibly radically important and innovative thinking space, which may have just exhausted you Saturday morning, etc. Can you just go to the other thing? I just want to, before I ask Bracha to talk to something else, is to say that there is, you can see you are dealing with one of the great thinkers of the 20th century and 21st century. And fortunately, someone has created, up to a certain point, a website which enables you to go and find all her writings and all the writings about others about her. But what we need to do before we just open up to conversation is we are having a signing of this, because this for me is a great moment that we have actually brought together a series of very great scholars, including Judith Butler and various writers, Christian Bussy-Glucksmann, who is a major French philosopher of aesthetics, to write the first monograph on Bracha's painting, to enable you, as it were, to trace this journey that she's made in art through the book, which has this title, Art as Compassion. And it's that concept that I wonder if I could ask you to speak a little bit more to, because this is the product of 20, 25, 30 years of thinking, to suddenly think of art as this space, not only for, as it were, like witnessing compassion, suffering with, taking on and sharing and opening up to understanding. We are responsible now for reconstituting the grounds of the survival of humanity on this planet, with all that live it and share it, whether that is natural forces, animal forces, and ourselves. We are faced with huge questions as to how the 21st century can, as it were, reconstitute the grounds for our security, our safety, as co-humans on this particular planet that we depend upon for our survival. I've seen that. But compassion is also an extension of what you're saying about fragilization, because it's a mode of containing or being in touch with things that are so different, as you say, from everything that is trying to intensify individuality, consumerism, a sense of our desire just for things, to have things, to be better, to be more, to throw away the iPhone, get the next one, keep going, more things, as opposed to what is this responsibility. And if you take the word responsibility, we think I'm responsible for something, but also Bracha changes the word to responsibility, to have the ability to respond, which is a sort of primary aspect. So I wonder if you could say something, because we have to allow the audience also to participate. So just very briefly, 5 minutes on this question of what are you offering to the world with this idea of art as compassion?
I don't know. It's very difficult to answer in one moment. It is very difficult because I suppose that what I'm saying in many senses is putting upside down certain ideas we have about what compassion is. It is not only first of all, compassion is compassion. We can have as a hyphen in between. It is a passion that arises with something, with somebody, and that passion we have no promise about what kind of passion it is. It could be something very joyful, and it could be some suffering, but the idea is that on a certain level of connectivity between people and between the works and people, and there is a dimension, I would call it, a dimension where we can start to feel that there's no more object-subject, but a kind of a string, and it's like you touch here it moves here and it moves here as well. You touch here, it changes you, it changes the other thing, and so on. So on that level, when we enter a space and allow for compassion, then whatever you will, the resulting of that will show you that this feeling is not instinctive and it's not only on the level of emotions, but first of all, it is aesthetical. It is aesthetical. It changes the way we see. It adds dimensions to the capacity to perceive. And then if you move it a little more, you see that it is also proto-ethical because it conditions the way you address the other in a much more general way. When we realize that we are transconnected to the vulnerability of materials and vulnerability of the other, and that for that to happen, you have to fragilize yourself a bit, give up a bit of your power in a sense, so that you are transconnecting there, then we start to get the feeling to what an extent we can really introduce real change in the world, even in the political. And if I end with something that was maybe not clear yesterday, because there was a discussion, I say that this is if artists can talk, and sometimes we cannot talk, and it doesn't matter, but when we talk, it is a bit I feel it's my obligation to say there is and there will always be a certain distance between art and culture, and it's my obligation to say that we move from art to culture through the artistic, and we are not serving the culture in the terms of the culture. We are serving it in the terms of the aesthetical and the proto-ethical, and the movement is into culture. Otherwise, I don't see any reason to wake up in the morning and do this Sisyphean work.
Thank you very much there. I'm going to open it up to some questions from the audience, but I think that just if I can underline the point you've just made, which is that I think you are offering a very specific sense that art is the site of a transformative potential. Now, obviously, in our contemporary world, a lot of art is being used for all sorts of things, and we've just been the discussion I was at before about money and power and commodities and fame and celebrity. But we are trying to keep open this sense that there is still an incredibly important function for this level of thinking about what it is that what you're calling the aesthetical, which is something not just to do with what's beautiful or what's called art, but that actually catches these levels of encounter, sensation, perception, sensibility, and that these can be, as you say, organized through the kind of materials and processes we call art, and that can then lead, as we engage with it, to a sense of understanding, which is in a sense translated to a different language, the ethical, and in that sense you can then as a subject make a decision because you've been transformed by the aesthetic experience into a different kind of thinking of responsibility, and then you make a decision about a political act. But it's not that art now is in the service of politics or art has just become purely ethical. I think this is the uniqueness of what Bracha is literally, as you say, is introducing into culture. We as thinkers and participants in it here and artists and things, from that particular space that is what she's calling the aesthetic, the place of this particular doing, thinking, practicing, opening up and connecting. So I'd like to see if anybody would like to make a comment, pose a question, however varied it is.